Tonight, Celia is the only storm active, but things could soon change with something bubbling up in the Atlantic. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for June 25th. Well, here we are with another day in the wide world of tropics, with Tropical Storm Celia the only storm active and what is putting us at code blue due to impacts in Socorro Island, and given its current path right now, 30 storms remain the total count for this year so far, although it looks like that number will be going up in the next several days. In the Atlantic, it's day 25 Atlantic hurricane season, and we have Invest 94L now with a 60% chance of forming in the low latitude of the main development region. Could pass through the Windward Islands before causing some possible impacts across northern Venezuela and northern South America in general. In the eastern Pacific, it's day 42 when you have Tropical Storm Celia active, probably peaking at this point given the fact it's entering 25 degrees Celsius sea surface temps, and there's also another area of interest that could be forming in the next 5 days. It's a 20% chance at the moment, but there's some pretty good model support for it to become a tropical storm in the early part of next week. In the western Pacific, there is nothing going on. We have been discussing that thing that the GFS continues to develop either in to the east of the Philippines or the South China Sea. There's been no other model supporting that, and as such, we are continuing to keep it at no areas of interest. We'll see if that changes anytime soon. In the North Indian Ocean, we are in the dead part of the season, which means that there should be no surprise that there is still nothing active in this basin and nothing expected in the next 5 days. Don't really need to ramble on about the specifics at this point. It's really the same thing every single bulletin at this point. Here is a solid imagery on Celia. You can see what appears to be a banding eye. It's not an actual eye, and it looks like there is no intercore with this in the slightest either, so needless to say, I think it's a pretty good chance that this has probably started peaking. Won't get much stronger. Maybe we'll get up to 70 miles an hour, but it's likely not going to get to hurricane status. Here is the satellite imagery, and you can see the Atlantic side of things. 94L is that first tropical wave that is to the southwest of the Cape Verde Islands. There's another tropical wave that's coming up behind it. Hasn't really been any sign of development with that one. There's also a front that's been exiting into the western Atlantic. In the eastern Pacific, you can quite clearly see Celia and how it's been finally not as sheer to the last 24 hours. However, it's doing with the sea surface temperatures now, which means it is going from one inhibiting factor to another. In the western Pacific, you can see what's going on here. It's a bit of a monsoonal mess to the east of the Philippines at this point, but other than that, there's really not much going on. A frontal system that's been carrying through Japan and eastern China and possibly some part of Taiwan. In the North Indian Ocean, you can see the monsoon is somewhat coming back in the Bay of Bengal, but not as prolific as we have been seeing. And there's been some monsoonal activity in the Arabian Sea as well, which is not the most usual thing to say. Southwestern Indian Ocean is completely dry for most part of it. Everything's more or less confined to the low latitudes of the southern hemisphere and not really towards the mid latitudes, so Madagascar is enjoying some pretty dry weather right now. In the Australian region, the entire continent is dry, but there is some shower activity that continues to progress across the country of Indonesia, pretty much the same as what we typically expect for this area in this time of year. Eastern Pacific sea surface temperatures, we are seeing a bit of a divot thanks to Gloss and Celia traversing over those waters. Those temperatures have now gone down to 26 and 27. Where Celia is over now is pretty much 26 going down to 25. The 30 degrees Celsius isotherm in the Gulf of Mexico continues to expand. Otherwise than that, it's 28 to 29 there. Caribbean Sea and main development region, as well as the Western Atlantic, still 27 to 28, as the subtropics remain around 25 to 26 at this time. Of course, we're still going to be seeing that warming trend continue as we get into the thicker of hurricane season. Bay of Bengal, it's around 28 to 29 here, with some areas at 30 degrees Celsius in the western part of the Bay of Bengal. Arabian Sea, it's around 27 to 28, with some areas of 29, especially closer to land. In the western Pacific, it's looking to be around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, a lot more areas at 30 degrees Celsius than the last few days. And in the southern hemisphere, we're seeing those temperatures around 28 still, closer to 27 at this point near the coast of Australia. As you head in the southwestern Indian Ocean, those temperatures do decrease to around 25 to 26. As we head into the sea surface temperature anomalies, they did officially call off the La Nina by the Bureau of Meteorology, although it's still looking like it is still just there, just very weak. But as of right now, we are in this cool neutral conditions. La Nina is expected to come back, but the eastern Pacific temperatures remain below average. Atlantic remains above average for the most part. in the Western Pacific and North Indian Ocean are also above average for the most part. Ocean heat content has been growing in the Caribbean as well as the areas to the northeast of Venezuela. Other than that, there's that same pocket of insane OHC to the south of Florida and Mississippi. We've also got that ocean heat content in the Western Pacific that's been looking pretty good in the Eastern Pacific, or eastern of the Philippines, I should say. Sorry about that. The Eastern Pacific in general is not looking that great in the ocean heat content side of things. Quite a bit to discuss on the model side of things, so we'll look at Celia first. As of right now, it's initializing at 4 millibars, stronger than it actually is, but you can see some strengthening possible tomorrow, but that time will come to an end as it does experience those cooler temperatures. Another disturbance is what the GFS is wanting behind the system. That could possibly become a tropical storm in the next few days, although I think the GFS is being a bit too quick on this, given the fact that they do have a history of being quite aggressive with the Pacific Basin in general. We'll see what ends up of that. With the Atlantic thing, we know we're tracking 94L, and you can see what the GFS does there. The 18Z GFS has actually backed up quite a bit on 94L, not really developing it until it's in the Caribbean, and even if it does develop it, it's going to be so far south that it will be dealing with too much land now. This doesn't seem like the most likely scenario at this time, as much of the models are more north than that, but this is definitely going to be a lowrider at the very least, and this kind of did intrude into the longer range, so I guess we've kind of covered that aspect because there's nothing in the Atlantic after this. Looking at the long range for the Eastern Pacific, you can see what goes on with that new system behind. Eventually strengthens to what appears to be a Category 2 hurricane, no, maybe even Category 3 with a GFS here, before eventually weakening off there and dying as it heads further west. And if that were to verify, that would be the westernmost a storm goes before dying this season so far. We've had a lot of dry air and cooler waters over there, so it's definitely speculative whether it would make it that far, but we'll see what ends up happening in the coming days. Keep in mind this is the long range, which means the chances of this happening are less concrete. Things are definitely going to be changing with this forecast here. Here is our shameless plug. You can join our Force 13 store, or well, go to it and you can purchase animations, sweatshirt, merch, all kinds of things that have our logo on it or whatever. You can also see that we're very, very enthusiastic about selling pillows. Looking at the Celia models, it's once again the Western Pacific with what it's been doing. It's still the only model to do what it does. Now it is trying to produce a tropical storm that eventually becomes a typhoon in the South China Sea before making a what appears to be a high-end Cat 2 landfall near Hong Kong. It looks like to the west of there, and then finally weakening overland while another tropical storm forms, while another possible system tries to form way to the east of that but doesn't really last long. And if that wasn't bad enough, by hour 384 we see a giant mess of systems trying to brew all across the basin. So I don't know what's going on here, but I can tell you right now this is probably not going to happen in the severity that the GFS is trying to make it out to be. I have no idea when the GFS is going to get off this, because literally none of the other models want this. You can look at the Canadian all you want, and you can see by hour 240, there's really not much going on, and the Canadian has been doing pretty well this year. Maybe something over here, but yeah, no, the GFS has been on some interesting steroids with the Western Pacific as of late. I mean, yesterday the 906 millibar typhoon, who knows what they're doing, but I guess we'll see what they have in future runs. For the on this day, we're looking back to 1960 on June 25th, where Typhoon Olive was in the middle of hitting the Philippines as a Category 3, was previously a Category 4 with winds of 145 miles an hour, destroyed most of the crop life in Luzon, and of course caused storm surge and killed over 400 people. There was also Tropical Depression 1, which was weakening after its Texas landfall in the Atlantic. And there was Tropical Storm Bonnie with a Y in the Eastern Pacific. Of course, the Eastern Pacific didn't have great record keeping, so who knows what the actual intensity was. We'll never know, but who in the world spells Bonnie with a Y? You can find more of our On This Day products powered by Cyclone History on the bottom bar below. Well, here we are, the next name in the Atlantic. We could be seeing it soon. It's Bonnie, followed by Cullen. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking out for Darby and Estelle. And in the Central Pacific, while it may be a party in the USA, the party we'll have for Hone when it forms is not going to be anytime soon. In the Western Pacific, we're looking at for Chaba, followed by Irie, and in the North Indian Ocean, the next two names here are Citrang, followed by Mandus. I've been going over this screen for the last 2 months, and the only way that's changing is if the GFS verifies, which probably won't happen. In the Southern Hemisphere, we're looking out for Darien still in the Australian region. We have about 6 days left to get Llama before the nameless changes. In the South Pacific, we have Hale up next. We'll be back for another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night. We'll probably be one of the secondaries with Nathan currently on vacation.